Demetri Spinrat.
And this is Isaac Meyer.
And we are back with part 2 of the life story of my favorite Nazi-punching gangster who, for legal reasons, cannot tell you exactly what he did with a large number of people who crossed him.
I don't know what you're talking about, gangster. Mickey Cohen was a very legitimate businessman, and after reading his autobiography, I'm convinced that he just was completely above board in everything he did.
So last week, we learned a bunch of really valuable business lessons from Mickey Cohen and his compatriots in his very legitimate businesses. Like, you have to do your taxes. You have to wear fancy suits, but not cashmere suits. Those are a little too fancy. And sometimes you gotta play tough in business.
Yeah, and also don't build hotels in Las Vegas with mafia money and then skim off the top. Because, of course, we left off with the death of Bugsy Siegel, old Benny Siegel, as Cohen calls him. And Cohen, of course, never directly admits to involvement in Siegel's death. But as we mentioned last time, it's pretty likely he was at least aware of what was happening, if not actively involved. And of course, after Siegel's death, Cohen is the next highest ranking member of the syndicate in Los Angeles, and so is pretty well primed to take over, and in fact would later say, quote, "I took over from Benny right away on instructions from the people back east. To be honest, his getting knocked in was not a bad break for me." So, yeah. I mean, definitely had nothing to do with that. Very legitimate businessman.
So after the mafia equivalent of a layoff, there is an open position that our guy is very happy to fill.
He is, yes. He's able to quickly step in to Siegel's businesses, build up a huge income, take over the kind of mafia industry, for lack of a better word, in Los Angeles. He does also purchase a mansion right around this time in Brentwood, California. The address is public knowledge, 514 Merino Drive. I did check on, because my mind is deeply broken, on Zillow. From what I can tell, it's still the original build, because I've seen photos of it when Cohen lived there, and it seems to still be the same build. $5 million estimate today.
Ooh, that's a spicy meatball.
He did have to sell a bunch of his mobster stuff inside for reasons we'll get into. I don't know how much of the interior is left, but I would hope for the sake of whoever owns it as much as possible. And of course, he built a little throne room in his new Brentwood home to receive people, various businesses he's involved with. Everything at this point from real estate to investing in the oil industry, actually. But he also does have 3 front businesses, the legitimate businesses that he launders all his money through, essentially. They are out of the same building at 8804 Sunset Boulevard, which, by the way, now, of course, is a bunch of condos, a haberdashery, a jewelry store, and a tailor shop. So, as far as the IRS is concerned, he has become like a millionaire just by selling hats, jewels, and nice suits.
That man sold a lot of hats.
Just a lot of hats.
And if some people lost their heads in the process, well, they didn't need hats anymore.
Yeah, I mean, really, what kind of man would he be shooting people? That's just lowering hat demand. He's just a hat salesman. I do also want to encourage people, by the way, again, 8804 Sunset Boulevard. Check out the condos that are there now. They are so ugly. I'm a fan of modernist trash, but these are a bit much even for me.
Las Vegas was so much nicer when the mob was building it.
So it is suggested that while he's in LA, his take on these ventures is around 60% of the illegal proceeds. For the legal businesses, probably something a bit more normal. But for any, like, a bookie, for example, that he takes over from Siegel, about 60% of that money is going to him. And maybe 20% of that is being forwarded back east. So he is keeping 40% of the proceeds on most of the illegal activity that is going on in Los Angeles by the late 40s.
Oh, wow. Are his bosses back east okay with this? Because on one hand, it does, the more money he makes, the more money they make. But on the other hand, that's a pretty big cut that is not going to them.
From what I could tell, no one had an issue with it, or at least nobody outside. Like, the syndicate does eventually start turning on itself, and then people have an issue with it. But he's not breaking any rules there. And I mean, it makes sense, right? You have people like him in every major city. And so, you're not just getting the 20% revenue stream there, you're getting other revenue streams as well. So the other thing I do want to note here, because it will come back around, interestingly enough, is that around this time, Mickey Cohen takes a brief foray out of various wars over Los Angeles to get involved in a different conflict that certainly will not draw any unwanted ire our way when we talk about it.
Oh boy.
Yes, the First Arab-Israeli War, also known as the Israeli War of Independence.
Oof. Okay. All right. How does this guy who works for Murder Inc. develop his Middle Eastern peace strategy?
Well, basically, it's not a Middle Eastern peace strategy, I'll tell you that much. He is very invested in Hollywood. He likes being part of the Hollywood set. He likes being a Hollywood gangster. And so he eventually becomes close with a couple of his co-religionists in Hollywood, one of whom is a screenwriter by the name of Ben Hecht. Hecht also becomes very politically radicalized during this period. He basically comes around to the "you can't trust Gentiles" position, and becomes convinced basically the British let the Holocaust happen to kill off as many Jews as possible to keep them from going to Israel, and therefore stabilizing the area to make it easier to control it as a part of the British Empire.
Oh, that's a fun new Holocaust conspiracy theory I haven't heard before.
Yeah, so Hecht, because of this, because he becomes so radicalized, develops a connection to something called the Irgun, which is one of the most radical of the Jewish militant groups in pre-Israeli history in that region of the world. They are the extremist faction, essentially, of the pre-Israel Zionist militant movement. And Hecht then reaches out to Cohen and says, basically, will you help fund these guys with your mafia money? And in his own words, he was like, I like that Jews are fighting like racket guys. That's how he says it. And so he funds their cause, actually. He involves the mafia in financing and equipping the Irgun to fight the British, and eventually, during the Arab-Israeli War, to fight against the various invading Arab states as well.
Wait, I'm sorry. This guy is full on funding a group of militants that is fighting a United States ally? And
yeah,
everyone's cool with that?
Yeah, he had fundraising dinners for them.
He ran official charity fundraising dinners for attacking a United States ally?
I think, to be fair, by that point the British had announced they were leaving, but yes.
Oh my god. I don't understand how this man gets away with a fraction of what he gets away with.
I mean, other fun fact, I do have to note this. Later on, of course, he will run afoul of American law for different reasons. And he will actually try and convince the Israeli government to intervene on his behalf. David Ben-Gurion does not return his phone calls. So he does try to cash that favor in, but it does not work out. But that's just a little aside. Most of his concern is something called the Sunset Strip War, which brings us back to a guy, Jack Dragna, who we were talking about last week. So Dragna was the head of the LA mafiosi before Bugsy Siegel and the syndicate and Cohen roll into town. And since Siegel had taken over, he'd been subordinate to Siegel, but now he's not interested in taking orders from Cohen anymore. And so by 1948, Cohen and Dragna are taking pot shots at each other or at each other's followers. So for example, in February 1948, one of Dragna's lieutenants, Tony Cornero, is assassinated. Then in July, another one, handsome Johnny Rosselli, tries to orchestrate a drive-by against Cohen that is not successful. Supposedly, Cohen is actually looking down at a scuff in his car as the drive-by is happening, and so he gets missed by all the shots.
Wow. So I am detecting a certain pattern in the names of Jack Dragna's guys here. Is there perhaps a little bit of fracturing going on in the Harmonious Syndicate?
Absolutely. You remember from last week that Cohen calls Dragna basically an old school mobster, an old school Italian mafiosi who does not like the idea of having to work with a Jew, and certainly not liking the idea of having to take orders from a Jew. It's very much, the old school mindset of the Cosa Nostra. This is our thing.
I just want to pause to say you did not tell me last week that one of the other nicknames for Mickey Cohen's crew was the Kosher Nostra. And that
I
was
thought everyone knew that.
That was such an omission, Isaac. You have to tell me these things.
I had assumed the people knew. So yeah, there's still very much part of this is also like a generational conflict between Cohen and this older breed of mobster, and an ethnic conflict between a more multicultural mafia, I guess, the woke mob, literally, and the old school mafia.
We can't have mob wars anymore because of woke.
They definitely had this mob war. Mickey Cohen actually will be shot at one point during this at the theater. He's hit in the shoulder with a 30-06 round. At another point, he orders a couple of retaliatory hits against Dragna's men. He doesn't talk too much about this, other than mentioning we got a few of their guys in his discussions of this at a later point. Dragna's eventually going to give up in the Sunset Strip War. He'll just realize that he is not going to successfully take Cohen down. The two will never really make peace. Cohen never has him killed. He's a little too worried about how obvious that would be. But eventually the U.S. government actually handles most of the tricky stuff for him. Eventually Uncle Sam says, hey, Jack Dragna, you're not a U.S. citizen, and you're very involved in organized crime. He was born in Italy. He was not born in the U.S. And so they decide to deport him. And while Dragna's fighting that legal case, he will die in a motel in 1956. While having an affair with his mistress. So, good for him.
Hey, at least he went out doing what he loved.
The other thing I want to say about the Sunset Strip War is that name was coined by one of the most famous journalists of this period, a guy who's going to show up quite a few times, or maybe a couple more times in the course of the Mickey Cohen story, a fellow by the name of William Randolph Hearst, who is, of course...
I've heard that name.
Like one of the biggest figures in the history of journalism, kind of. A true mastermind of the yellow press, trying to kind of drum up sensationalized stories to move newspapers, and who loves Mickey Cohen because Mickey Cohen makes headlines, and headlines sell papers.
Yes, this is one of the things that is just so wonderful about doing research for this kind of episode, is that the newspapers, they know what moves the papers. They know what people want to read, and they have this sort of love-hate relationship with some of their best characters.
Absolutely. And I mean, Cohen and Hearst meet several times over the course of their career. They know each other. They are social. And Cohen has a lot of positive things mostly to say about Hearst. And Hearst, meanwhile, I mean, actually, let's talk about what Hearst has to say about Cohen. Because I actually want to share a little story from 1949 that's a part of this period that I think gives you a bit of a sense of sort of how Cohen is trying to kind of portray his image day to day and how Hearst is a part of that. So this is the story of Mickey Cohen acting as Robin Hood in the tale of one Alfred Pearson. So Alfred Pearson in 1949 is an electronics shop owner who has a reputation for being a cheat and kind of an asshole. Nobody likes him. And the LA Examiner early in 1949 runs a big story about Pearson's interaction with a local widow by the name of Elsie Phillips. So that widow asked him to repair a radio, but is not happy. Phillips is not happy with the quality of the work and won't pay the bill, which is $8.91. And so Pearson is like, okay, you're not going to pay the bill because you think I did a shoddy job, which it appears he did, from what we can tell. I'm going to sue you. And the judge sides with him because she didn't pay the bill. The judgment is $81, more than she can afford to pay, and so she has to sell her home to pay the judgment. Pearson then buys it back at auction for $26.50 and rents it back to her as a way to kind of continue making money off of her. And this is a big sob story, and it's a public interest story. Look at this dickhead who legally, has the right to do what he did, but he's just mistreating this poor honest widow. And so a group of LAPD officers decide, we want to try and improve our reputation. We're going to see the reputation of the LAPD is not sterling during this period, and offers to pay her rent on her behalf. And the chief investigator of the city police commission, a guy named Harry Lawrenson, will hire an attorney to try and recover her house, to try and like make a legal case to recover it. Lawrenson does this in part because he wants to be seen as a gentleman, and in part because he fucking hates Pearson. He has tried to arrest him multiple times for a variety of fraud-related crimes. Pearson has done some jail time because of this. The one time he did get convicted was for price gouging during World War II. And so Pearson does not like Lawrenson and tries to countersue him in turn. But so far, this is just petty drama between a presumably upstanding-ish cop and an asshole repairman. But you'll never guess who that cop is secretly on the take from.
Oh boy, is it Mickey Cohen?
Oh, it's Mickey Cohen. And so Captain Lawrenson goes to Cohen and says, and this is according to Cohen at least, will you dispense some justice? The law cannot give justice. Will you give justice?
I'm sure that's exactly the tone in which he phrased that.
Yeah, exactly that. And then angels came down from heaven and light shined on Mickey Cohen. He decides, out of purely the charity of his heart, to orchestrate a rally outside of Pearson's shop, basically getting together other business people who disliked the guy, make a bunch of noise, make him look bad, and then when Pearson will comes out, a bunch of Cohen's thugs are going to be in the crowd and they're just going to beat the shit out of Pearson. And nobody who's there is going to care. And all the cops will conveniently be off doing something else and be unable to intervene in this. And thus the problem will be solved. Cohen will later claim that this plan was approved all the way up to the mayor of Los Angeles. That everyone was in on like, fuck this guy, sure, whatever. So this goes down on March 19th, 1949, and it's without a hitch. They beat the shit out of Pearson. Just the absolute stuffing out of him. Until, on the way home, Cohen's guys are in their car, they're driving home, and they take an illegal U-turn. And there's a patrolman nearby who pulls them over, does not know who they are, didn't get the memo because he's a traffic cop, like, why would anyone tell him, and arrests all of them. So, okay, not a huge deal. Cohen calls up the cops, they're immediately released. But not before a local photographer who is camping outside the county jail gets photos of all of them being arrested and sells them to the LA Times.
Wow. And I bet Hearst loved that.
Oh, he was having a great time with it. So the story is a huge scandal. At this point, Cohen cannot bury this, his involvement in having these people beat the shit out of Pearson. They're clearly being arrested. It's clearly people who were there. And, that's all kind of now in the official record at this point. And it's clearly people who also, they're all known associates of Mickey Cohen. And so Cohen and his enforcers are charged with conspiracy to assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit robbery, because they do break up the store a little bit too, and conspiracy to obstruct the due administration of law. So are 3 members of the LAPD, including Captain Lawrenson. And also at the same time, Cohen, by the way, also is dealing with a separate case because he's been tried for disorderly conduct for insulting a police officer who raided one of his establishments. So he's in court a lot right now. So Cohen, how does he handle it? He decides he's going to go on a charm offensive. He says, I'm a good upstanding citizen. You know how I'm going to prove it? I'm going to go to Pearson, the radio shopman. I'm going to say, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I, of course, had nothing to do with it because I'm an honest, upstanding businessman. And to prove it, I would like to buy Miss Elsie Phillips' home back off of you. And then he just gifts it to her. There's a photo of the two of them kind of shaking hands. He's handing the key. And she looks very confused, and he's just doing a big old hey. And this is what William Randolph Hearst had to say about this, because Cohen also gave her a substantial cash gift. Quote, this is a very kind and wonderful thing he did. And he's addressing his editors now. I don't want you to refer to him as a hoodlum anymore. A man who does a thing like this isn't a hoodlum. You can call him a gambler, but I wish you'd see that he gets a fair break.
Wow.
So there's one other fun little coda to this. But before we get there, Cohen is, of course, acquitted for his involvement in this. He can't prove he was behind any of this. He's able to kill a lot of his involvement in stuff like this, either because of his connections to the LAPD or because he has a bunch of connections in up in Sacramento, up in the capital of California. R.D. Samish, who's one of the most powerful lobbyists in California history, is a good friend of Mickey's and on his take too.
At the risk of sounding like a too much of a literature scholar about this, this is a guy who seems incredibly aware of his own mythology and very connected with the kinds of people who are writing both fiction and nonfiction stories about the mob at this time.
I think
that's very interesting.
That's a very fair assessment. I mean, we'll talk about this more. Cohen is a Hollywood gangster, first and foremost. Like, he likes being in Los Angeles. He likes being seen with famous people. He likes that as part of his persona. And actually, we'll talk about a great example of that in a second. I do want to note there's one more theory about the Pearson thing.
Tell me more.
So, later on, the columnist Walter Winchell will get an anonymous letter, which will claim that Pearson actually used to work for Bugsy Siegel and had helped forge race information for, like, faking bets, essentially. But then started threatening to expose the whole thing, and that was also why Cohen got involved. He decided to, like, rough this guy up because he was a potential snitch. So, maybe not the most altruistic, but he's very careful to play this as altruistic.
Mm-hmm.
So, right around this time, in the fall of 1949, Cohen also falls in with a growing media sensation in Los Angeles, a man who has sort of come up. He's an inspiration, actually, for a figure we talked about in one of our famous civil suits we discussed. Any guesses who it might be? Someone very associated. I don't think he's from your original neck of the woods, but very associated with the culture.
Would that be Larry Flint?
Not quite. The other side of it, Billy Graham.
Wait, excuse me. What? He gets associated with Billy, the preacher.
Yes, the preacher Billy Graham.
Famous moralist Billy Graham.
Yes. So if you have not heard of Billy Graham, first of all, congratulations. I'm very happy for you. But
yeah, I want to live in the world that you live in.
He is one of the, like, famous OG televangelists, like one of the first people to take Jesus into the media in, like, a big way. Very much an inspiration for Jerry Falwell, who, of course, will end up in a legal battle with Larry Flint. And Billy Graham's career really gets started in the fall of 1949 when he comes to Los Angeles and starts kind of publicly preaching and becoming this media figure, you know, the man of God who's come to the den of sin. It's a good story. Actually, William Randolph Hearst helps promote that story, partially because it sells papers, partially because he's getting old at this point and he's probably worried he's going to go to hell.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with my televangelists from this period. I know that there were some love your neighbor types. I don't recall Billy Graham being one of those, though.
So, you know, we're going to see about that, because actually one of the people who comes to one of his early revivals is a fellow named Jimmy Vouse. So Vouse used to be an Army sound engineer, then after the war works for the LAPD as a wiretapper and actually had helped run some dubiously legal, potentially warrantless wiretaps on Mickey Cohen. But when Cohen finds out about this, he doesn't do anything to Vouse. He just says, here's a bunch of money, come work for me.
You got moxie, kid, and also some skills I could use.
Yeah, you know, technical skills. You always tell people you want marketable skills that will get a mafiosi to come buy you out from your current job. That's why I went into teaching. So Vouse feels a little bit morally conflicted about working for the mafia for some reason. And so is very susceptible to the whole Billy Graham thing about, like, repent for being a sinner and all that. And so he gets saved by Graham, and shortly thereafterwards asked Graham, hey, can you intercede with my boss, who is a man of deep sin, and I think you can save him and really help, you know, change the spirit of L.A. Graham will write about it in his own autobiography. He'll say he's very noble. He's nervous about spreading the word to this, you know, man of crime and all that, but also it's important, all that shit, you know. Nothing too surprising. I want to talk about how Cohen describes this, because I think it's incredible. So, his version of the story starts off with Vouse, quote, who used to do some electronic stuff for me, calling him late at night. Just some electronic stuff. You know, he's my electronics guy. Well, I want you to be the first to know that I'm going back to the church, back into Christianity. And Cohen's response, haven't you been Christian this whole time? No, you got to give your life to Jesus. Cohen says, well, that's all right with me, Jim. As far as I'm concerned, this little Jew is 100% in your corner.
Oh, he's so supportive.
He's very supportive. So supportive that he actually offers Vouse $1,500 to get him started on being a Christian.
I didn't realize you had to buy in.
Yeah, I don't know how the finances involved in that. Vouse eventually takes only 500 after some pushing, and then will eventually ask Cohen to sit down with Billy Graham, which Cohen will agree to. And this is what Cohen has to say about it. Graham just wanted to make my acquaintance, or maybe without knowing me at the time, he had it in his mind that he might convert me. I don't know. He came in as a guest and I treated him likewise. Naturally, I was a bit uncomfortable in the hands of all these church people. They coppers had a 24-hour detail on my house, so they must have known about this meeting at the police department. It didn't change the coppers' opinion of me at all. Hearst will then run a story, though, about this, because Cohen says they just are social, but William Randolph Hearst is like, this is too good. I'm going to run a story about how Billy Graham is going to convert Mickey Cohen to Christianity. It was things like this that got all the converting bullshit going every few years. See, the papers made quite a thing of it. And he claims that the one time Graham did try to bring this up with him, his response was, "Now, I may not be considered by a lot of people to being a good Jew, but I was born a Jew, and that's it." But you do still see people claiming today that either Mickey Cohen secretly converted to Christianity, it's even on his Wikipedia page for some reason, or that Graham got close to it, but he backed off at the last minute. It's apparently one of Graham's boosters claimed this later on in a newspaper article that Cohen had secretly converted, and that's how the rumor got started. But Cohen denied it. My understanding is, especially with evangelical Protestantism, it doesn't count if you deny it. So never happened.
I don't think that Mickey Cohen seems like the kind of guy who would deny it if he did it.
Yeah.
And that strange of evangelism is very much about being loud and proud.
Absolutely. Cohen presents himself as having a friendship with Graham, though. They will continue to interact for a variety of reasons. We'll get to it. It's possible that he saw it as a way to help his reputation. He always presents it as a very sincere thing. That he just, enjoys this guy of good character who's, doing his best in the world. So, at the height of his power, Mickey Cohen will eventually go down. And a lot of that has to do with a level of government that he has no control over. He's pretty thoroughly infiltrated the Los Angeles government. He's got control of the California government to an extent, but you still got the feds. And on May 10th, 1950, the Senate passes Resolution 202, which forms the Senate Committee to investigate organized crime in interstate commerce, using the authority granted to it by the Interstate Commerce Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the Constitution of these United States of America.
Oh, the Interstate Commerce Clause. May I ask, which agency oversees that one?
Oh, got it.
I was just going to do a little riff about the blackmail material that Meyer Lansky supposedly had on Hoover. Don't worry about it.
Oh wait, I don't know about this. What?
Wait, you never heard about this?
No. What?
Yeah, there was this rumor that the reason that Hoover never went harder after Meyer Lansky is he had some kind of blackmail material on him.
I love
possibly homosexual.
Amazing. What an entrepreneur. No, I didn't know anything about that. I just know about this committee, which is named after one of the hardest to pronounce senators in American history, Estes Kefauver. I have tried many times to look that up. He's a Democrat from Tennessee back when that was still a thing. So it's called the Kefauver Committee. He narrowly lost out in the vote to become chair of this committee to one tail gunner Joe McCarthy. So it very narrowly became a Kefauver thing over a McCarthy thing. So Kefauver uses his role as chair of this committee to issue 400 subpoenas to known gangsters. Mickey Cohen is one of them. He initially does try to dodge the subpoena by going on road trips to do business dealings in Chicago and Texas, but does eventually get got. And at the same time this is happening, the IRS announces that they are going to audit Mickey Cohen. They have some concerns around his finances from 1946 through 1948 for some reason.
Oh my. So, just because he did his taxes doesn't mean he did his taxes right.
I don't know what you're talking about. That hat shop made all that money. Actually, it's a really bad time for him because he also loses out on a vote for LA commissioner or LAPD commissioner. He had a hand-picked candidate, but one of his handpicked commissioner voters dies right before the vote, and that swings it in favor of an actually honest cop named William H. Parker, whom Cohen does not control. So it's his bad times all around. And also, to cap it all off, as he's getting ready to go to this committee, I did find this story. He gets accosted by someone who wants his help with something. You know who that someone was? Frank Sinatra.
I was like, you could name anyone and I would believe it at this point of Mickey Cohen. But yeah, you know what? Frank Sinatra's probably would have been number one on most logical celebrities to name.
While this is all happening, Sinatra's also like, hey, Mickey Cohen, can you take a step away from your legal problems to go beat up my rival Johnny Stompanato? Because I think that he's trying to steal my very young girlfriend, Ava Gardner.
What a guy. He did it his way.
Not in this case, because Cohen is like, fuck off back to Nancy. I'm busy. So Cohen testifies before the part of the Kefauver Committee on November 17th, 1950. A small group of senators have flown out to LA. They take the testimony in the federal building. And it is a shit show. He shows up late, first of all, claiming that he didn't get advance notice around the timing. And then tries basically to dazzle these senators. It doesn't work at all. I'm going to quote from some Time magazine coverage of this whole event. From the minute he entered a crowded courtroom in Los Angeles' federal building, Mickey was the star of the show. Wearing a natty brown suit, brown tie, and a deep black scowl, he faced a whole battery of newsmen, photographers, movie cameras, and tape recorders. Said Mickey proudly, I could spit on the sidewalk and it would make headlines. For 5 hours, and without notes or without much help from his 2 lawyers, he answered questions put by committee members and 3 senators. Whenever they put him on the spot, Mickey would hoist his bushy eyebrows, look injured, and answered, I don't know. He denied every charge on which he was questioned. I ain't never muscled no one in my life. I ain't never offered no policeman a bribe. I ain't never pistol whipped anybody. I ain't never been with no prostitute. I ain't ever had no part of a fix. I never strong-armed nobody in my life. I may have beat up some people.
Wait, he never muscled anyone, but he did beat up some people.
Yeah, and I'm unclear on the kind of semantic difference between muscling anybody or strong-arming someone and beating them up. He does get questioned about his income, too. He admits to a $40,000 home, which is quite a bit in 1950 currency, $48,000 in furnishings, 2 Cadillacs, and an armored car, but also insists that he was broke and owed $300,000 to various friends who lent him money with no collateral security or paperwork because, quote, they just happened to like me.
What incredibly generous friends he has.
His friends just love him.
What an incredibly generous man who hands out thousands of dollars to his friends for random conversion events, but also claims to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt.
Yeah, this is a bad time for Mickey Cohen. Obviously, none of this has legal implications. He's not on trial, but I should say it can be potentially used against him, but it's not a trial. He's not in danger of going to prison right now. It looks really bad. Anyone who's closely associated with Cohen is kind of starting to distance themselves because it's not a great vibe. It's an even worse vibe because as this is happening, a Fresno drug dealer named Abraham Davidian gets caught and turns state's witness and names a bunch of close Cohen allies as his suppliers, and then mysteriously dies in his cell right before the trial, with a close Cohen friend and starlet, Barbara Payton, providing an alibi for the accused killer.
Mickey Cohen has this incredible ability to just waltz right into jail whenever he wants.
It's pretty nuts. Also, his longtime lawyer, Sam Rummel, meets with some cops in December 1950, and then the back of his head mysteriously gets blown off by a sawed-off shotgun.
That is a cause of death, which I'm sure is natural in the business.
It happens all the time in Los Angeles. It's just a rough area. So it's not looking good. But the first time things go bad for Cohen, it's not federal investigations. It's not even all of the many deaths he definitely had nothing to do with. It is, of course, our fine friends at the Internal Revenue Service.
Oh, the IRS gets him again.
In April 1951, after they conclude their investigation and audit, Mickey Cohen is indicted for tax evasion, and he is forced to sell several of his properties and his personal assets including his antique gun collection and his bulletproof doors inside his house to cover his personal costs. The trial kicks off in June of 1951. There are 12 days of witnesses. And actually his wife gets indicted too, but that's dropped partway through. It is a staggering revelation of how much money is at play here. Mrs. Cohen at one point admits to getting a coat and a cape that respectively cost $3,000 and $2,400. Today, that is a $37,000 coat and a $29,700 cape.
Oh, what are they making coats out of? Damn, girl.
I have no fucking idea. I am not classy enough to own that stuff. Shockingly, after 4 hours of deliberation, Mickey Cohen is indicted on 3 counts of tax evasion and 1 count of making a false statement to the IRS. The sentencing hearing is on July 9th, and this is what Judge Benjamin Harrison calls Cohen. Quote, "A hard luck child. You're not as bad as you're pictured. Perhaps more of us would be gamblers if we'd been as lucky as you. I think Mr. Cohen is a very personable individual. He's a good salesman. At least he's good at selling himself. Los Angeles must take part of the responsibility for what happened to him. He's a product of the melting pot of this city. He was permitted to operate here as a betting commissioner with what I think was a virtual acquiescence of law enforcement officers. His parents came from abroad. He had little education here, and the environment produced Mr. Cohen."
All right, so he does seem like he's started to win this judge over a little bit.
Yeah, like
too. This is not the condemnation of a scoundrel that I'm used to hearing from judges in this kind of case.
Yeah, even his fucking tax evasion case, they're just like, he seemed like a nice guy. So he gets 5 years in federal prison, $10,000 in fines for all 4 counts. Like that's per count, so $40,000 in total, and over $100,000 in court costs. He does try to appeal and settle, but he ends up serving 3 years, 8 months, and 16 days in federal prison. And actually, pretty close by to us, actually. He serves it in McNeil Island Federal Penitentiary in Pierce County, Washington.
Oh, we did have a lot of islands that did make for very convenient places to send people for penitentiary reasons and also leprosy reasons and other reasons.
Apparently it was a very comfortable island vacation. He supposedly bribed the shit out of the guards, and so was eating meals in their dining room, got his clothes regularly pressed, got to shower several times daily because he's a huge hypochondriac, instead of twice a week, which was the norm. So he's very comfortable. So in 1955, he's able to return to LA. By this time, he is 42. He's still fairly young. In the meantime, life has been hard for LaVon Cohen. She had to actually get a job under an assumed name to pay for an apartment because all of Cohen's all of his properties got seized. He actually is Cohen when he's on probation. Initially, I love this. His probation officer has him doing social work. He has to go talk to kids about how crime doesn't pay and you should go straight.
Wait, the guy for whom crime absolutely did pay has to go talk to kids about how crime doesn't pay?
I want to believe he was using this just to recruit kids. Like, I know that's a little dark, but that has to be what happened. Around this time, Cohen also gets divorced. Initially, things are a bit rough at home. He apparently is very depressed when he comes back. His enterprises are in kind of a rough shape. It's claimed to be amicable early on. LaVon Cohen will say to the press, "It's just one of those unfortunate things. We haven't been able to make adjustments since he got back. It's not any more Mickey's fault than mine." Over time, things will get a bit less amicable, particularly when it becomes clear that Cohen is trying to hide some of his assets in the divorce case. And she will eventually say that she was under a doctor's care for most of her marriage and that Cohen took pleasure in basically humiliating her and mistreating her. He does not comment about this very much, but I'm inclined to believe her that he's very concerned with this appearance of a good marriage. But in reality, I mean, it's important not to forget he's not a great guy. So a lot of what's happening for him publicly is weird human interest cases. People are very into interviewing him for Los Angeles dailies, talking about this mobster who's gone straight. There's a whole bunch of stuff about how he picked up gardening in prison and now he's gardening in his spare time. But shockingly, after his parole expires, I know this will surprise you, he does get back into the gambling scene and casino operations. He very quickly re-enters the criminal scene as soon as he is able to.
So what kind of criminal scene is he re-entering here? Because it sounds like a lot of his compatriots have also gone down in the same investigation. Who's left to pick up the pieces?
I mean, at this point, the syndicate's still going strong, right? And so he's able to kind of reinsert himself, and he is, people still like him. He's a talented manager, for lack of a better word. And he's still this famous kind of front figure who's trying very hard to put a positive spin on the mafia. And where else but actually on national television? In 1957, Cohen will return to the public spotlight by accepting an interview from a guy named Mike Wallace.
Mike Wallace?
Yes. So this is one of the most famous journalists in American history, most notably for his role on 60 Minutes. At this point, he just has a show on ABC called The Mike Wallace Show.
Is he the guy that they made Good Night and Good Luck about?
I believe so, if memory serves.
Yeah.
So, he does. So. He just does a 60-minute televised national interview about being in the mafia on the Mike Wallace Show on national TV.
Wasn't this like the golden era of television where
you could put all kinds of wild stuff.
Yeah, just anyone who was famous for any reason. You could find just the wildest TV interviews on earth of them.
It's pretty nuts. And I mean, this is a crazy interview. I was unable to find complete archival footage of it, unfortunately. I think it is out there somewhere, but I couldn't find it. I did find some transcripts though. So Wallace asks him at one point, "You've killed at least one man. How many more?" And Cohen's response, "I don't know if you'd call these them killings. It was either my life or their life. I never killed a guy in my way of life who didn't deserve it." Yeah, he's kind of dodging a bit, but still being upfront.
I should quickly correct myself. Good Night and Good Luck is about Edward R. Murrow, not Mike Wallace. Okay. Although Mike Wallace was very famous around the same time period.
Another great American journalist. One way in which Cohen does not restrain himself is by talking shit about the chief of the LAPD, Will Parker, who is very invested in trying to clean the LAPD up, in part to get rid of people who support Cohen. He calls Parker a sadistic degenerate, a known alcoholic, and basically accuses him of being a closet homosexual and pedophile, in large part because Parker has been whipping the LAPD into a lot cleaner of a force, but also a much more militant one. There's a lot of accusations of police misconduct and police violence during this period. Parker ends up suing ABC and will get a settlement from them, actually, over them broadcasting the stuff that he says. And while he's in New York, he also swings by a Billy Graham rally. Actually, it appears this is the origin of the rumor that he secretly converted. Graham has this big rally at Madison Square Garden where Cohen is supposed to be this pre-announced special guest, and it's kind of hyped up as though he's going to come out and say he's accepted Jesus. Cohen just comes out and waves at the crowd instead. And it's claimed that Cohen was actually offered $10,000 to just show up at this tour, with the kind of implication that he should say he's accepted Jesus, and he just chooses to ignore that implication. I do want to note that Billy Graham will deny that rumor, but something's going on there. They're very, they're just good friends. So by the late 50s, Cohen is back as a front-man for the mafia, back as a public figure, and really, working very hard on this public image of the kind of gentleman mobster. The Jewish journalist Al Aronowitz would describe him, quote, "It was easy for Mickey to seduce me. The truth is I fell for him hard. He was a showman. Oh, I know he killed people and he was a Yiddish mobster and he was just plain no good. But I mostly liked Mickey because he was fun." Which, I kind of get it.
His bosses in the syndicate back east were not always known for being quite as fun as he is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what makes Cohen interesting, is that because he's this LA figure in this kind of media appearance obsessed town, that's kind of the image LA still has today. He plays the role of the LA mobster, not just the regular mobster. He even actually tries to write his first autobiography around this time that he hopes to get optioned as a movie, though that does not go through.
So, this is really interesting, actually, because this is around this time, a lot of mob movies are being made, and I know that the Italian American community is having some complicated feelings about their portrayal in mob movies. And meanwhile, Mickey Cohen's like, all in, baby, film my life.
Mm-hmm. I mean, his life from his perspective. So all those people just fell onto bullets, or other people shot them. So, Cohen is still very much Cohen. Around this time, he has a new lawyer, Paul Caruso, since his old one's head mysteriously exploded from shotgun shells. And when Caruso will eventually drop Cohen because his reputation is kind of hurting his ability to get other clients, he says Cohen pulls a gun on him, and Cohen he has to actually use Cohen's sister as a human shield to get out of Cohen's office and escapes. Shockingly, there are no charges after an LAPD investigation of this.
Wow, I was wondering because Cohen, I mean, he's been putting on a good face for a long time, but he did have kind of an explosive history.
Yeah, I mean, he's not good at controlling his temper. And that's actually going to really burn him here because two things ultimately are going to bring Mickey Cohen down for the second and final time. First, in 1959, he is subpoenaed by yet another Senate Committee on Organized Crime. This one led by John McClellan, a Democrat from Arkansas. But more importantly, it's really being masterminded by a hot young lawyer working for McClellan with big aspirations by the name of Robert F. Kennedy.
I don't think that guy's going anywhere.
Probably not. Certainly not his son.
The Kennedy, just some Irish family. Doesn't sound like they'd get anywhere big.
They didn't watch out for the worms. So basically this time, the interest of the McClellan Committee is organized crime in the Teamsters Union. And the hope is really to investigate that connection. Cohen gets subpoenaed as a part of this. This time it's televised, too, so more people are watching it. And Cohen, of course, is evasive. He's Cohen. But the important thing is that Kennedy is a very aggressive lawyer. He kind of tries to browbeat Cohen into giving him some answers. And Cohen is very aggressive back to him. He really, he doesn't quite tell Kennedy to fuck off because it is still a Senate hearing. But if he could have, I think he would have. So at one point, for example, Kennedy asks him, what does it mean you put somebody's lights out? You talked a lot about putting someone's lights out. And Cohen responds, I can't answer that. I'm not an electrician. And apparently Kennedy almost hit him after that. Like someone had to grab him.
Oh my God.
So this will be bad because in a couple of years, in 2 years, his older brother, Kennedy's older brother, by the name of John F. Kennedy, will of course be president. And RFK will be his attorney general in charge of the federal, criminal system. And now RFK hates Mickey Cohen. So that's bad.
So he has made some enemies in high places.
Yes, and he's also in 1959 implicated in yet another killing. This one is of a guy named Jack Whalen, who's an enforcer associated with the Dragna family. It's not entirely clear why Whalen gets killed. Cohen will later say that Whalen gets killed because he pushed around folks in Cohen's outfit, and most notably an old friend and ally, Fred Sika. But it's also suggested that Whalen may have publicly defied Cohen, basically ignored orders from him, and Cohen was worried about looking weak or out of control given some of his recent problems. Regardless, in December 1959, Whalen is at a restaurant, Rondelli's, that's owned by Cohen, and he is shot in the head. And one of Cohen's associates, a guy named Sam Lasigno, turns himself in and claims self-defense, right? That Whalen tried to kill him, I pulled a gun and shot him back. And later, Lasigno will be convicted of first-degree murder, and then when he is convicted, he will flip that story, and he will say, I was paid $50,000 to take the blame for this, and told I would get no more than a manslaughter conviction.
Oh, I see. All right. So now that the person who was supposed to take the fall is no longer willing to take quite that high a fall.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, this is kind of a problem, but fortunately, Mickey Cohen is able to stride into any jail in California, apparently, which should be illegal because he's an ex-felon, but he just does it somehow and beats the shit out of Lasigno, who then reverts his testimony again. It becomes this whole mess that does eventually end somehow in Lasigno being acquitted. But it's a big scandal when it happens. I mean, this very public murder, this whole story where it's constantly shifting, like it's the most obvious, case of foul play in the universe. It moves a lot of papers. On Cohen's autobiography, this is actually the back cover. Like the back cover quote is the real guy who whacked Whalen is ... implying that if you buy this, you'll get to find out the salacious answer. He doesn't actually say who actually killed Whalen. He just says the guy who hit Whalen was an expert shot. This expert shot never missed before with whatever it was, you understand. But Sam Lesigno, who was accused of the hit, couldn't hit the wall of an auditorium. But basically just, I know who killed him, but I'm not going to say.
Was that another Hearst special?
I actually don't know if Hearst was involved in publishing the autobiography, but certainly he's taking tips at this point. So Lesigno gets his manslaughter charge and is acquitted of the murder charge. Cohen, of course, is cleared on all charges. Though his bulldog, Mickey Jr., is run over by a car in July 1960 that was probably driven by Jack Whalen's brother.
They're taking out hits on each other's dogs.
Yes, they whacked his dog.
Oh my God.
But again, drawing a lot of bad attention to Cohen right around the time that JFK is taking office. And it's actually really bad timing because right before, a couple months before the presidential election, the IRS indicts Cohen again for 13 counts of tax evasion. And then in January, JFK takes over. The new attorney general sends his own guys to personally make sure that Mickey Cohen gets nailed to the wall for tax evasion.
I am actually astonished, given the sheer number of crimes that this man committed, how long it takes to take him down.
It's pretty wild, honestly, how long it takes. But when he gets taken down hard. He gets a 15-year sentence in 1961, which is more than Al Capone got. Al Capone only got 11.
And he is not a young guy at this point, right?
He's in his late 40s by this point, if I'm doing my math correctly. So he's getting up there.
So he wouldn't be out until his 70s, which is getting up there in years for a gangster.
Yeah, it's not a job with a great retirement benefits. The supervising judge, George Bolt, has this to say during the sentencing. The record in this case shows that since 1955, he has followed a fantastically extravagant way of living without paying any income tax and without producing employment or visible means of self-support. Within a very short time of release, Mr. Cohen was in full flight on a profligate style of living, financed by fraudulent or extorted so-called loans in a very large aggregate amount. The fact that the defendant ingratiates himself into at least a speaking acquaintance with a number of prominent and respectable people, and that he used them and their names in effecting his frauds does not minimize his misconduct, in which neither religion, patriotism, friendship, sorrow, or fear were accepted by Mr. Cohen as a means towards his unprincipled ends. This judge is not convinced.
No, this guy is not charmed by his demeanor.
So RFK
his
throws
hard luck history.
So RFK throws the fucking book at him. Or, that's not technically what the AG gets to do, but clearly there's some conversation with the judges. Not only is there a 15-year sentence, Cohen goes to fucking Alcatraz.
Oh my.
Yes,
this is like the bad old days of Alcatraz,
yes.
Right?
Maximum security Alcatraz time. It is shuttered very shortly thereafter in 1963, but technically Mickey Cohen was in Alcatraz. After it's closed, he is transferred to another penitentiary in Atlanta and serves out the rest of his time there, and is largely uninvolved in outside events. Though, you know what happens to RFK, right?
Hang on. Let me run through my list of terrible things that happened to the Kennedys.
Yeah, nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys.
Is he the guy in the car accident?
No, he's the one who gets assassinated. The other one. Both of them did.
Wait.
Yeah, so
not the guy who kills a woman in a car accident?
No, that's Ted Kennedy.
Okay,
Too many Kennedys.
A lot of bad things happen to Kennedys in cars.
So yeah, JFK is killed in 1963, but RFK is killed in 1968 when he's running for president, often blamed as one of the reasons the Democrats lose that year because he was a very popular candidate. And it is worth noting, he is shot during the California primary, shortly after winning it, by a guy named Sirhan Sirhan, a Palestinian-American who says he shoots Kennedy because of Kennedy's support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War. But this happens in a hotel. The assassination happens in a hotel that was originally financed by Mickey Cohen. And it was a Cohen stronghold. Sirhan Sirhan had worked as a stable boy at a racetrack Cohen owned in Santa Ana. there is a theory that Mickey Cohen from prison had RFK killed.
Oh my god, this is the wildest twist you could possibly have come up with.
There's at least one more that's pretty fucking crazy.
Holy shit, this isn't as crazy as it gets.
There's one more good one. So he gets released from prison in 1972, surviving at least one assassination attempt in prison, by the way, which he then sues the prison system for $10,000 in damages because they didn't do enough to protect him. All that gets garnished by the IRS immediately, but it's important to make the point. He appears in the press one final time after a child of an old family friend gets kidnapped. Patty Hearst. You ever heard that name before?
Oh my god, are you fucking kidding me?
So after she is kidnapped by the left-wing extremist group, the Symbionese Liberation Army, and then later ends up joining the Symbionese Liberation Army, Mickey Cohen meets with William Randolph Hearst and announces that he's going to find Patty Hearst.
What the fuck?
He is not successful, but it is his last major press appearance. Ultimately, she gets caught by the cops and she's arrested, and it's a whole thing. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking back what I know about that story. That was Patty Hearst was not found by Mickey Cohen. Most definitely not.
Yeah, I mean, so that this is the tail end of his life, though. He has not lived very cleanly, and eventually, in 1976, he develops stomach cancer. He will die on July 29th, 1976, from complications caused by that cancer. He is both still in an ongoing legal battle with the IRS over the garnishing of his assets, and he's still in the press, actually, pretty consistently. Around this time, Meyer Lansky, who is still kicking, will write a book. He'll write a book himself with the help of some Israeli journalists as one of the last members of the real old guard of the mafia, and will praise Cohen as a genius, one of the great ones. And when he knows he's on his deathbed, he will even call up the press one final time and ask them, you want to talk about my connections with people like Jimmy Hoffa? I'll tell you about Jimmy Hoffa. You want to know about Patty Hearst? I'll tell you about Patty Hearst. Or I'll tell you about another famous Californian in 1976, Richard Nixon.
Oh, shit.
Direct quote. He was a big help to me in my operation in Orange County, but if he ever told me he would have been president, I would have died laughing.
So he was just calling random reporters, just spilling the beans on everyone?
I believe he called a deathbed press conference, so multiple reporters in there at once.
Wow, to the end, he was so determined to be in control of his own press.
Absolutely. And I just want to end with a quote from his autobiography towards the end. I have blown up in the Hollywood way. In Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, or New York, I would have been lost in the shuffle, an ordinary high-rolling gambler. It's a different situation out here. And thus ends the life of Mickey Cohen.
Wow. I feel in a way I have been taken in a little bit by his own story and have forgotten some of the parts where he was a fairly hot-headed murderer, apparently a terrible husband.
I mean, I think that's the interesting thing about him, right? He is a terrible person by basically any ethical metric, but he's such a good showman. Yeah,
at that time, I mean, like Hearst, he had a kind of a side hobby of inciting foreign wars.
Just the one time. Just
you'll get one.
Mm. And this is a reminder, by the way, no, neither one of us care about your opinions on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Please do not message us about that just because we happen to be Jewish and mentioned a thing that happened 80 years ago. Thank you.
But if you do want to fight the British,
that is always kosher.
And you do want to give me money.
Fuck them limeys. You mean for very legitimate businesses that you were a part of? How do you feel about hats?
My legitimate hat shop.
Yeah, it's a very legitimate hat shop. Now, I mean, I think it's very interesting. He tries so hard to portray himself well. One of the things I didn't even have time to talk about here, he develops what he calls, I don't know if the other side of this would agree, a friendship with another famous Yid, Sammy Davis Jr. He's a big fan of old Sammy. And he claims there's a whole scandal in the 50s where Sammy Davis Jr., who is black, is dating a famous actress, Kim Novak, who is a white woman. It's a big scandal, and actually Columbia Studios, who owns Novak's contract, tries to break the relationship up. Cohen, in his autobiography, claims that he tries to protect Davis as a part of this, that the head of Columbia goes to him and says, go break this guy's legs, go break this racial slur's legs. And Cohen's response is, I'm not going to do that. I like this kid, right? I'll advise him that maybe he doesn't want to draw the ire of people like this, but I'm not going to do it. Sammy Davis Jr.'s family would claim that Cohen was a part of threatening him, right? Basically saying, like, he did threaten him to break up this interracial relationship.
Oh, so some of what he is saying in his autobiography might be full on bullshit.
Shockingly,
years later.
I mean, that's the thing. He knows how to portray himself in a way that makes himself look sympathetic, but it also means you can't believe a thing he says.
Yeah, it was not necessarily the way he conducted himself.
Yeah, it's, I mean, interesting, but he really understands how he can play himself up as this media figure and get public sympathy as this kind of Robin Hood, even as he is not that shy about doing some pretty, bad stuff. I also, I have a few more thoughts I want to share, but do you have any final Mickey Cohen thoughts?
Go on. No, go on. I am mostly just fascinated by I do a lot of thinking about how characters are constructed, and specifically how the characters of criminals are constructed in fiction. And this was a guy who was determined to fictionalize his own life story and to make himself into a character on a level that, like, almost no other criminal we've covered has done it quite like him. There've been a couple that kind of approached that level, but, like, no one's doing it quite like him.
Absolutely. I mean, again, the ultimate Hollywood gangster, to the point that he is writing the screenplay of his own life as he's living it, kind of.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the last thing I want to note that was kind of on my mind this whole way is the kind of the Jewish side of his story. Because the reason I first heard of Cohen, the reason this came together, is because, within Jewish communities, to peel things back a little bit for those of you on the outside, one of the things that can get a little tiring is the common stereotype of Jews as always being kind of nebbishy, kind of, how would you even translate nebbish out of Yiddish?
Oh, God. I was actually just trying to do that the other day. It's very hard to do it without referencing Woody Allen.
Yeah, I mean, Woody Allen kind of is I would say Jerry Seinfeld's kind of also a nebbish. Not one of these
shining lights of Judaism, yeah.
Jerry Seinfeld. I'd say Seinfeld's kind of a nebbish. That kind of, like, high-strung, kind of scrawny, like, not very impressive thing. That's very often how Jews get portrayed, I think, in media for non-Jews, and it can be very tiring. And sometimes names like Mickey Cohen get brought up in Jewish communities as, like, hey, that's not just who you are, right? There's this other side of Jewish history that is maybe not good, but certainly not nebbishy.
Yeah, I think every single ethnic group has its own very complex relationship with masculinity, but the Jewish relationship with masculinity, especially the American Jewish relationship with masculinity, is incredibly complicated in a way that I think a lot of Jewish guys will sort of look at this gangster history as an alternative to some of the ways that they're portrayed in the media.
Absolutely. I do also want to note the flip side of this. Of course, as I'm reading it, it's mostly sources by non-Jews. I got a little bit weirded out by how into talking about him being a Jew all of the non-Jews were. Like, very into, this Jewish mobster, this Jewish figure. Like,
you get that a lot in Histories of Murder, Inc., because, I mean, it was an organization that was in some ways very multicultural, but in some ways very aware of the cultural lines it was crossing. So people really play that up in the histories of it.
I can see where it's coming from. And to be clear, I'm not saying this is like anything bad. It's just a little bit weird because, frankly, when I hear non-Jews very obsessed with talking about who is or is not Jewish, it's usually coming from a not super great place that's very uncomfortable. And the whole Billy Graham thing is just, like, I think it's very funny. The way it gets played up in kind of some of the Christian circles, some of the articles I found talking about this is a little bit weird. Like, some of the language about, saving this sinner is so close, we're so close, or we secretly did it.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of celebrity culture, this is something that's really interesting about televangelists of the period, is that they are not just making themselves celebrities. They have a certain incentive to rub some elbows with other celebrities. And Mickey Cohen would have been a big get for Billy Graham.
That is probably true. So, now that we have offended all of the Gentiles as much as we possibly can, if they still for some reason want to support our completely legitimate hat shops, where can they find us?
Well, we should talk about some changes in where they can find us and what we'll be doing there.
I guess that's probably true.
Yes. So this is going to be the last episode of Criminal Records. We are pretty swamped with the number of projects that we've taken on. Isaac is working in a new school. I am working at a job where I have to learn JavaScript, which is going to take up a lot of my free time.
Yeah.
And I also have some other projects, podcasting projects that I would like to focus on. I've been trying to do them for a very long time and have not had the time.
Yeah, I love Criminal Records. I've had a great time doing it, but it is a lot of work unlike History of Japan, for example, it's very often me having to teach myself history that I'm not super familiar with, which is pretty hard to do when I'm also trying to learn a new job, learn a new curriculum. So Dimitri's got some other projects to work on. I'm open to potentially reviving this in a different form at some point, but probably it'll be at least a while before that happens. So it's a hard announcement to make. I'm very proud of the work that we have done together on Criminal Records.
We have told many absolutely bonkers stories, and we have not illuminated how the justice system works in any way whatsoever. If anything, I am more confused than when I started.
I do feel like I have some notion, coming in talking about law as like a social construct and not something that's fixed, but something that we're always kind of actively deciding. I think, if anything, I feel even more secure in that opinion than I did, beforehand, watching some of these cases where the law is literally being hashed out or just ignored as a social system of, for example, mafia dominance of the California government is kind of altering what is or is not legal de facto, even as the words on paper are not changing.
I should say, yeah, it's not that you have not illuminated any aspects of how the law works for me. It's just we've shown some light in some corners and realized what a mess it is in there. The social construct of the law is I can see some of the shakiness of some foundations in a way that I did not come into this expecting to be able to see. But also I've learned some really cool and fascinating things about the law in a way that does make me, in some ways, I actually have a lot of respect for the absolute banana pants American legal system in a way that I don't think I did before, especially comparing it to some other more repressive systems around the world.
And maybe it's a good reminder of the role we all play in kind of keeping the system functional, right? It's not something we should take for granted that it works and works fairly. We have a job to do in making it work fairly and making it continue to work and work better. And if that's the lesson you take away, that's a good one.
And the beauty of America's legal system is it's not set in stone. It is always capable of change and reinterpretation and new precedents coming in. And oh boy, is this going to be a wild decade for the American legal system.
So one last time, we should probably do a shout out for the patrons who enable this show and some potential future and current projects as well. Would you like to rattle them off for me?
Yes. A final shout out to our wonderful patrons. You are Jan Leonard, Stephen Elkins, Martin Oliveira, Clark Canning, Ian Kellett, Matt Haynes, Jackie Frostocker, Monkey Sack, Alayla McCullough, Kieran Murphy, Peter Wales, Robert Prine, William, Arno, Jonas Brandis, Nicholas Kroll, Jerry Spinrad, Jared Stevens, Jeffrey Dwork, Stefan Hrushka, Joshua Kane, Robbie and Kat, Jacob Key, Aaron Finkbeiner, an anonymous Anna's Hummingbird, Mark Sy, Gil, Leslie Ikuda, Trash Taste Enjoyer, John, Christopher, Harrison Reese, Inoue and Rio's Ghostbusters, NihongoKaizen.com, Shimao Toshio's History of Japonesia podcast, Jennifer Pianzo, James, Brenner Podgorski Smith. A house is a perfectly cromulent mascot. The fish I catch are Rhodes Scholars compared to Samuel Alito, Schmuck, And everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
Thank you all very much for listening to the show. I hope it was fun. I definitely had a good time.
I had a great time. And if you are subscribed on Patreon, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause that. And then when I start a new project, I am going to continue updating the Patreon, but keep it paused for a few months so that anyone who doesn't want to get charged has a chance to jump out then if you've forgotten that you are still subscribed. So we're going to try to make sure that you don't get charged for content that is not being released.
All right. Thanks for listening, folks. Hold on to your hats.